Hello and a warm welcome to this Budget Day Live coming to you from the campus of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. This is the Silicon Valley and the IT hub of the country. And if you go by the buzzword of today, that is startups, Bangalore alone can boast of around 5,000 IT startups in the country. So the expectations are galore, but has the budget of today really lived up to the expectations of the startup community? That's a million-dollar question. And joining me now is a scintillating panel of guests. Next to me seated is Mr. N. Parthasarthi, who is Secretary General of FKCCI Bangalore. Welcome, sir. Next to him is Sharat Sharma, who's the CEO of Brand Sigma and co-founder of iSpirit. Next to him is Professor Rahul Dey, Hewlett-Packard Chair Professor, Quantitative Methods in Information Systems area. Next to him is Professor Charan Singh, who is the RBI Chair Professor of Economics. And next to him is Mr. Naveen Soni, who is the President of Toyota Kirloskar Motor. Welcome all of you on this special programming. I'd like to begin with you, Professor Charan Singh. How do you look at the larger picture of the budget today?
Well, the Indian economy is passing through a very difficult time. There's been a growth slowdown in India. And so the global economy is also in a very difficult situation, and that is reflecting almost on India's exports. In these difficult situations, the finance minister really had a daunting job to do.
Okay.
And I think he has attempted to do it, but in his attempt, it seems that he has been trying to please different sectors of the economy, but a complete picture is not emerging.
Okay.
So I would say it's a mixed budget. I would also say that it's for the first time now, I feel that this budget was a golden opportunity. They had started the government in 2014. Last year it was still an initial stage. They had settled down. It was a golden opportunity to seize this opportunity. The finance minister also mentioned that in his speech, that I treat it as an opportunity. But I'm now beginning to feel that there's a research vacuum that's emerging, and therefore a complete picture is not really emerging. So the initiative...
But when you say research, it is research for the budget as to what all areas were to be dwelt on?
Yes. When you are doing a reformist budget, which he mentions that he wants to do, he wants to transform India.
Right.
It's a reformist budget. It needs to be backed with lots of research.
Right.
And I see a vacuum of research there.
Let me begin with Mr. Parthasarthi now. Were you expecting some kind of a big bang from this budget?
No, definitely not. We were not expecting a big bang.
Okay.
But as the professor was mentioning, the external environment, particularly economic environment, is deteriorating and it's difficult.
Okay.
India is considered to be a silver lining, but still no country, no economy can flourish alone.
Okay.
So we wanted the government to provide or create environment, support system, and to facilitate the industries to grow. To startups to kind of to innovate themselves. But that has happened, but not to the extent one want to do it.
Okay.
For example, startups, it is not that they want a there's tax holiday.
Right.
Basically, these are people who are innovative. They want to focus on developing that rather than getting digressed in compliances, getting the licenses, doing so many other things. But that kind of a thing has not come.
But Sharat, if I were to ask you, people have been criticizing the Startup India campaign, saying that it was just a catchphrase. And but after you've seen the budget today, do you think there are still loopholes which have to be dealt with, or some kind of a direction has been set, or the tone has been rather set by the finance minister?
You know, I think there's much that remains to be done.
Okay.
You know, from a Startup India campaign perspective, the reference point that everybody is following is something called Stay in India checklist.
Right.
Because some of our most successful early stage startups are leaving India to redomicile in Singapore and US.
Right.
So what does it take for them to stay in India? What regulations, as he pointed out, need to be fixed? And there are 34 items in that. And one set of items relate to Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Finance back in January when Startup India was announced said that they would roll out those changes at the time of the budget. So amongst the changes that were supposed to be rolled out, there were 9 of them. So far, only 3 we have found them in the budget.
Okay.
So I think it's a very modest kind of a step forward from that point of view. It doesn't have the reformist zeal that Professor Singh was talking about right now. Given that they had understood, they had made commitments that this is going to happen, there is a gap between intention and implementation.
But Rahul, there are a lot of other campaigns which were supposed to stimulate the startup ecosystem, like Digital India, for example, Make in India. There are many campaigns which have been spoken about. After seeing the budget, do you really feel that a campaign like Digital India would really support and complement the startup campaign?
See, there are a few things that came through in the budget. I'll just mention five of them here.
Right.
One is the use of Aadhaar for targeted subsidies.
Right.
Another is online procurement of agricultural commodities.
Right.
I'm seeing this as a very interesting move. And there are two instances in which the minister mentioned.
And now that Aadhaar would become a law, so you think that it will always become a facilitator for the startups?
It will become a facilitator.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's going to become a law as yet.
Okay.
He has said that he's going to use it, and I read the text carefully.
Right.
So it is possible that there will be people who will be building products on top of Aadhaar to support these various campaigns that are being mentioned.
Right.
So this digital literacy mission, this is more for households. There's one on IT procurement, and there's another one on these various subsidies being given, like the Fasal Bima Yojana. And
so are you hinting at the fact that the linkage of Aadhaar with the startups and the linkage of the subsidies with the startups would probably at some point of time would become mandatory?
No, the linkage of Aadhaar
Or it would
with
rather become a structural requirement?
Will become an enabler. It's a platform which will help with these targeted subsidies.
Right.
The startups will step in here. It may be established firms also, which may step in to provide those services which are needed to deliver these subsidies.
Right.
So this is, in my opinion, a good thing.
Right.
It is a positive part of this budget.
I would like to get the comments from Naveen now. After seeing the budget, do you really feel that the ecosystem of the startup which has been spoken about really gets a thrust on the basis of what Finance Minister has spelled out today?
See, whether you're talking about startups or whether you're talking about entrepreneurship, whether you're talking about business community,
right,
there's a basic requirement that all three of us would be requiring in seeing consistency of policy.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
Right.
When the government is working so hard on improving its position on ease of doing business,
right,
there are certain things that they have to show what is necessary for a long-term commitment point of view.
Right.
So it's not just one budget which will make such a big difference.
Right.
Maybe 9 out of 3 or
But
3
when you
out
particularly talk about startup, given the fact that it was announced on 16 January
Sure.
2016,
Sure.
there's a lot of definitional ambiguity as well, because a lot of people are coming and asking that what really constitutes a startup. Don't you
Very
think
true.
that was a relevant question to have, which should have been somewhere addressed?
could
in
have been
the
addressed,
budget
and
speech?
then the point that I was trying to make is whichever category that you come from, whether you're talking about entrepreneurs or startups or ITs or
Right.
whatever category that you consider, why would I make an investment if my investment is not secure?
Right.
Why would I make that investment because I'm unclear of the future?
Right.
So a long-term commitment is a most necessary thing. Budget day is not for surprises.
So that assurance has not been addressed. That
I
assurance
don't
has not
think
been
so.
addressed.
I
by
don't
the-
think so. Those are some flash in the pan kind of a situation, but whether this is really going to help people's entrepreneurship
Right.
to walk into this direction confidently that my money is secured and I can take a business decision, or should I move over to another
Right.
country where that environment is more secure?
Mr. Parthasarathy, you were talking about the 3-year tax holiday which will be given to the startups. But there are a whole lot of questions coming up that why 3 years, why not 5 years? Would a startup really accumulate the kind of profits which were expected in the 3 years?
To tell you honestly, whether it is 3 years or 5 years, it is just a support that they get. That is
Okay.
not the most important thing.
Okay.
The most important thing, as I was mentioning, was they should have an ecosystem. The regulation should be minimal.
Right.
There should not be any Inspector Raj. They should be able to actually concentrate on developing their the startup.
Right.
They should try to get all the support
But
that's
Professor
required
Charan
to do
Singh,
that.
would this tax holiday really have a meaningful impact? Because that is one big question which is haunting everybody's mind, especially the startup community.
So I have been talking to quite a few youngsters as to what do they think about the startup. And I also wrote a small piece on the startup. We're looking at what the ecosystem should be like.
Right.
There are 2-3 things here. One of it is the tax holiday.
Okay.
Most of the young people who want to do really a startup, They really do not want any hassles, do not want to get into tax problems. They say, it takes me 3 to 5 years to really break even.
Okay.
And what is the incentive that I have that I should jump in and take all these risks that the country is imposing on me? I don't have a cozy job, a government or a private sector. I'm doing a startup. There's no fallback mechanism. If I fail, I fail, and I'm totally on my own. So therefore, tax holiday does give a strong impetus saying, go ahead. There we are.
And the possibility is that 90% of the startups generally fail.
Yes. If you look at the Silicon Valley, and if I have time, I'll tell you more about it. But one thing is clear. Though we say it's a tax holiday, one should be aware that indirect taxes stream continue every minute.
Okay.
So it's only that they have a tax holiday in terms of direct taxes.
Right.
The revenue stream for the government to some extent gets contributed even by the startups.
Okay.
So I think they should be given a free hand and said, go ahead, break even, and then we will talk.
But when you talk about his free hand, Sharad, I would like to ask you. Arun Jaitley also mentioned a point about special patent regime which has to be given to the startups. Talking particularly about the patent, when the plan was announced, they said that it's the patent filing is going to be free of cost. There's going to be 80% reduction in the cost. Would it really help?
Yeah.
And how would you actually bring in a safeguard against the shady companies who will be functioning in the garb of startups?
So last week, there was a regulation that was passed which essentially clarified that there would be no software patents in India.
Okay.
So let's be clear, patents are not unmitigated kind of a good thing to have. In fact, in India, like in New Zealand, like in some other countries, software is not considered patentable.
But is that not a demotivator for the software
No. This is actually
startups?
the right thing to do.
Okay.
So this is what the software industry, software product industry actually wants. So that is a healthy development.
Because generally there's an impression that if you have a patent, then your ideas obviously would not flow to someone else.
Yeah, but patent system is also broken.
Okay.
So today you have a company called Ericsson, for example, which is harassing Micromax and preventing them from selling phones. They're not themselves selling phones, but they have patents that they are extracting value from. So if you have software patents, you could have multinationals which could well kill all the domestic players without any problem. So patenting is not an unmitigated good in the context of technology. However, the budget talks about is how IPR is handled at the time of sale.
Okay.
That has been an issue, and that is an issue that needs to be resolved by specifying how that will be handled.
But do you feel optimistic after...
So I want to step back and say, look, slowly but surely, innovation policy does seem to be coming in place. The innovation policy at the very minimal level requires 3 things to be in place. One, we need our internet to have net neutrality. In the last in this year, that has been clarified. We need to have for software products, which is the growth area for the industry.
The software startups. Rahul, if I were to get in you, what happens to the non-IT startups? Because that's also a huge segment. Now, for example, to give you a small example of Chai Point, the food ventures which have been experimented with, Chai Point, Maskalandar. What happens to ventures like these? Do they have a reason to feel optimistic today after today's budget?
I don't think there is too much in there for them. Possibly the Startup India campaign subsequently will kick in and make things easier for them. But let me go back to the IT part, because that's the interesting part. We are in Bangalore. So I disagree with my colleague here that the 3 years is not enough. I think it's fine. In IT, we are not competing in India. We are competing with the world. And in that scenario, 3 years, if you don't prove yourself in 3 years and the government is giving a good signal, you're nowhere. The fight it's at a global level. We are talking about cloud and all these other processes that have come in, which are coming in at a massive pace from the Americans, from the Israelis. Our startup system should support, move in fast, we will remove the hurdles from you and work quickly. We cannot wait for you. You cannot be a Sarkari Jamai waiting for 5 years to flourish.
It's true that IT becomes the biggest cog in the wheel of this entire startup. But Professor Charan Singh, I would like to ask you about what I was just asking Rahul. What happens to the non-IT startups? Do they feel optimistic today? Really?
Well, I would like to revisit the IT startup story.
Okay.
The examples, he's very right. We are competing with the very best in the world, America, Israel, and all that. But please remember, they have a very strong fallback mechanism.
Okay.
You can take the risk, but you're on social security, and therefore you're not scared of losing your house, not getting your next meal. Up here in this country, when you have to inculcate a startup index, a startup story, which is very, very new, a very new psychology that is being created here, you don't have a fallback mechanism. I have met people in Delhi who want to do medical startups, and they say, we are in such dire situation now because we have lost all that we had, and we have no fallback mechanism. So he's very right. When we are competing with the very best in the world, we need to create that ecosystem. And probably one of the way to create that ecosystem is saying, okay, go ahead with the startup, put in 3 to 5 years. In case you fail, I'm here.
Right.
Now, you can agree with me that the thrill will vanish. The killing instinct will vanish, because then there's a fallback mechanism, there's a moral hazard problem, you really won't give in your very best.
Right.
But then, that's what happens. Startup is a story of failures. I should mention this to you if you permit me.
Yeah, actually, we will have to just get in, Naveen, on a very important aspect of the startup story, and that's the authentication of the startups. That's another very major point, and the government has been talking about an inter-ministerial board which is going to overlook the certification of the startups. Do you really think that is mandatory? Going purely by what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, and he said that he's going to cut down the bureaucratic hassles, and it actually opens the area for the bureaucratic hassles. Don't you think so?
See, I think where they're coming from is a certain amount of checks and balances are a must.
Okay.
You can't leave it open-ended and saying that, okay, I trust you would not be there to cheat me.
Okay.
While we have so many startups opening and closing on a daily basis, but at the same time, the authenticity needs to be validated. When you're talking about, Aadhaar cards and things like that,
Right.
this is a check and balance in the system where you could come up with the intention of, checking if anything is going wrong by various points of view.
But do you think that there is scope of self-certification, self-compliance, what they're talking about?
So the interministerial thing has been disbanded last week.
Okay.
Now it only requires you to be registered with the incubator.
Okay.
So that has already been taken care of.
Okay.
So that's not the current requirement.
Okay. But what about the number of research parks and incubators increasing? Did Finance
So
Minister
the
also spell out
incubators,
some?
by and large, haven't done well in India. India has a singular failure of all incubators, whether they've been in the private sector or they've been in the academic sector.
Right.
They have performed very poorly.
Right.
There's a recent Harvard Business Review article
Right.
which evaluates 7,900 incubators and declares a vast majority of them to be failures. So incubators are not necessarily successful until you have a system where there is innovation that is happening in an academic sector,
Right.
and that has to then be commercialized by taking it to the field.
Right.
Now the problem is, in our academic institutions, very little real research is happening.
Right.
Even if you go not far from here to Indian Institute of Science, there is very little research that
Right.
actually needs to be commercialized.
In fact,
so
another-
academic incubators have worked where that research is there,
Right.
and you need a pathway to the market.
Right.
In India, you don't have the research, so therefore the pathway to the market is actually useless. It doesn't work very well.
Naveen, do you see this as some kind of an inverted pyramid? Because a lot of people have been talking about startups as the fact that it's a replication of the existing prototypes. It's not, as like Prime Minister Narendra Modi says, that it's nurturing the creativity as well.
Sure.
But it's more of a replication story. Don't you feel so?
Yeah, at the same time, you have to be taking certain, how should I say, the assurances that these are not fly-by-night operators, because you're talking about commercial transactions, you're talking about people involvement.
Right.
So you can't be taking things for granted to that extent.
Yes, Mr. Parthasarathy
No,
wants to say
so
something.
basically, as you said, it's not a repetitive thing.
Right.
For example, if somebody is trying to create another Snapdeal,
Yes.
that's not going to
Yeah,
get the benefit out
e-commerce.
of this. That's not going to get the benefit under
Right.
this startup policy.
Right.
But you are trying to encourage startup, basically to see that finally India is also going to create one more Amazon or Facebook or Apple or Google, and to retain them in India so that they can grow big. But at the same time, while the incentives and the support mechanism that's provided is still inadequate. For example, angel investors who invest, they should get the dividend or whatever that they get or whatever the capital gains they get. That should become tax-free. That kind of encouragement is required.
And on that note, they have reduced from 3 years to 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Although the expectation was it will become even 1 year.
Okay.
Because the only kind of investment today that does not get capital gains exemption is actually the angel investment, which is ironical because that investment is the stickiest investment and also a high-risk investment. This is not like real estate where you'll at least get 80% of your principal
But does this entire framework also arrest the trend of startups going abroad to countries like USA and Singapore?
I don't think so. I think there is more work to be done on the Stay in India checklist for us to see that happen. I want to also talk about copycat startups. See, startup is such a generic term, right? That there are many types of startups. One type of startups are startups that take on an incumbent company or an incumbent system. InMobi is trying to take on Google and Facebook in mobile advertising. Team Indus here is trying to take on a system that only governments can send rovers to the moon. They say, look, we are a small company, we can send a rover to the moon. So they are taking on something substantially larger than themselves. So this is a David versus Goliath battle. In that David versus Goliath battle, the small guy can only win if they have some kind of a superpower. That superpower usually is technology. Right, and that is why
India was never a participant.
India is never a part. Now, why is this important? It is important because ultimately solving India's primary healthcare, primary education, financial inclusion is not going to happen through budget announcements. Is going to happen through this kind of radical, innovative, David versus Goliath kind of startups that are going to come. So they are important not because we'll create another Google, but they are important because we will solve illiteracy in India through the hands of a innovative startup rather than a government.
Will be from there.
Professor Charan Singh, your last thoughts? We to wind up the program.
Well, I think what is missing in the startup culture is the academia industry interaction. The Silicon Valley is exactly a great example of that. The Stanford University and the Silicon Valley go hand in hand. Many of the professors have a share in the startups that take place in the Silicon Valley. I think that is something which is missing here. The other thing which I think is missing is the acceptance of the failure culture in our country. At Silicon Valley, 1 or 2 failures is a standard. Rather, 2 failures is considered a must before the venture capitalist jumps in and says, here is my money, come on, let's do something together.
But in India, it will be sab doob gaya.
Absolutely. In India, the parents, the professors, the friends, everybody will abandon you. You say, you drill. So the startup culture is just not announcements. I think it's a culture which really is all pervading into the society. That's what I think is missing right now.
Definitely. So startup generally is considered to be a very potent vehicle of creating jobs. The intent on the part of the finance minister has been very explicit. The roadmap has been laid, but implementation probably is going to be the biggest challenge, and that will be something which needs to be watched out for. Thanks to all my guests who have come here and participated on this special program. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.